to virtual congregation Dor Tamid and our Shabbat morning story time. I hope you all are having a good Shabbat so far, a restful Shabbat, a peaceful Shabbat, Shabbat filled with family or friends, and Shabbat that will renew you for the coming week. Let's begin by singing some songs this morning and welcoming each other and welcoming Shabbat. We'll start with Hine Matovu Manayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. Hine Matovu Manayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. Hine Matov Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. Hine Matov Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. Hine Matovu Manayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. Hine Matovu Manayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. Hine Matov, Hine Matov, Yadadai, Yadadadadadai. Hine Matov, Hine Matov, Yadadai, Yadadadadadai. Hine Matovu Manayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. Bim bam, bim 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 bam, bim 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 bam, chiri biri biri bim bam, bim 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 bam, bim 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 bam. And let's hear all of you through the screen. Shabbat Shalom, hey, Shabbat Shalom, hey, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, hey, Shabbat Shalom, hey, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, hey, Shabbat Shalom, hey, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat Shalom. Ma yafeh hayom, Shabbat Shalom. Ma yafeh hayom, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. So coming up in just a few days, just about a week and a half, we've got a holiday called Tu B'Shvat. It's the holiday where we celebrate the trees outside. We celebrate the birthday of the trees. And so our first story this morning is called Sammy Spider's First Tu B'Shvat. And it's written by Sylvia A. Roos and illustrated by Catherine Janice Cohn. Sammy Spider was learning a new way to weave a web when he heard a scraping sound coming from outside the Shapiro's kitchen window. "Look, Mother," said Sammy, "what are Josh and Mr. Shapiro doing?" "It's early spring and they are planting," answered Mrs. Spider. Sammy watched as Josh and his father lowered the roots of a small tree into the hole they had dug. "Will we plant a tree too?" asked Sammy. "Silly little Sammy," said Mrs. Spider. "Spiders don't plant trees. Spiders spin webs. Now watch me weave this pretty design into our web." But Sammy wasn't listening. He was watching Josh water the tree with his garden hose. "Trees need water to grow and lots of sunshine too," replied Mrs. Spider. "Soon those little buds on the tree will blossom." A few weeks later, when Sammy peeked outside, he noticed buzzing bees and fluttering butterflies dancing among the blossoming buds. "Mother," he shouted, "what are they doing?" "They're drinking nectar from the blossoms," she said. "Can I drink nectar too?" asked Sammy. "No," laughed Mrs. Spider. "Spiders don't drink nectar. Spiders spin webs." As the days grew warmer, Sammy noticed fewer blossoms. Finally, there were none. "What happened to the blossoms, Mother?" asked Sammy. "It's summer now," said Mrs. Spider. "The blossoms have been replaced by bright green leaves." Just then a bird swooped through the leaves and sat on a branch. She held a twig in her beak. Sammy watched her fly off and return with more twigs. "What is the bird doing?" he asked his mother. "She is building a nest, Sammy. Soon she will lay eggs, and in a few weeks, little birds will hatch from the eggs." "Can we build a nest too?" asked Sammy. "Silly little Sammy," answered his mother. "Spiders don't build nests. Spiders spin webs." Sammy woke each morning to the singing of the bird. He watched the eggs hatch and saw her feed hungry babies. The baby birds grew and grew, and one day, when Sammy got up, the nest was empty. "Mother, what happened to the birds?" asked Sammy. Mrs. Spider pointed to the tree. "See how the green leaves have turned red and yellow? Fall is here, and the birds have flown south where it is warmer. Now help me weave this pretty pattern into our web." Sammy wasn't listening. He heard a scratching sound coming from outside and saw a little squirrel climbing up the trunk of the tree. "Mother, what is the squirrel doing?" "He's gathering food for the coming winter," she replied. Each day, Sammy watched the busy squirrel. The leaves began to fall off the trees until one day there were no more leaves. The squirrel no longer came to climb the tree. "It's winter and the squirrel is snug in his home," Mrs. Spider told Sammy. Sammy shivered. "Mother," he whispered softly, "my friends are all gone. The bees, the birds, the butterflies, and now the squirrel." "Not all your friends. The little tree is still here to greet you each morning," Mrs. Spider reminded him gently. "And look, I wove you a new blanket to keep you warm." Sammy wished he could share his blanket with the little tree. During the winter months, its bare branches were often covered with snow, and when the wind blew, it seemed to tremble. One crisp winter morning, Sammy awoke to a delicious smell. Mrs. Shapiro placed a freshly baked date nut bread on the counter next to a basket of nuts and dried fruit. "What's happening?" asked Sammy, looking down from his web. "The Shapiros are celebrating Tu B'Shvat, the birthday of the trees. They will eat foods that grow on trees, and Josh will plant a sapling to celebrate the holiday," explained Mrs. Spider. "Will we celebrate too?" asked Sammy as Mr. Shapiro entered the kitchen. "Silly little Sammy, spiders don't celebrate Tu B'Shvat," said his mother. "Spiders spin webs." Sammy came down off his web. He hopped onto Mr. Shapiro's cap just as he went outside to shovel the snow away from the base of the little tree. While Mr. Shapiro worked, Sammy climbed onto the tree and began crawling in and out through its branches. When Mr. Shapiro finished, Sammy jumped back onto his cap and they headed back inside. "Where have you been?" asked a worried Mrs. Spider. "I wove a birthday blanket to keep my friend warm," Sammy announced proudly. Mrs. Spider saw the beautiful web shimmering in the branches of the little tree. "It's lovely," she exclaimed. "Happy Tu B'Shvat, little tree," shouted Sammy. And as the wind came up, a branch with a tiny little bud seemed to wave back at him. The end. Our next story is called "Don't Pick Your Nose, Pinocchio." And it's written by Steve Smallman and illustrated by Neil Price. Geppetto was a carpenter. He had no family and was very lonely. He decided to make himself a wooden puppet boy and pretend that it was his son. The puppet was very realistic. It even had nostrils. Geppetto called him Pinocchio. Geppetto could talk to Pinocchio all the time, but Pinocchio couldn't talk back. Geppetto got some very strange looks when people saw them out together. Then one day, a kind-hearted fairy waved her wand and poof, Pinocchio came to life. "Be a good son to Geppetto," the fairy told him. "Don't tell lies, don't pick your nose, and one day you'll be a real boy." Pinocchio tried very hard to be good, but he couldn't resist sticking his finger up his nose and rummaging about. He pulled out little wooden boogers and flicked them across the floor. Geppetto slipped on them and fell with a bump. "Pinocchio!" he shouted. "Have you been picking your nose?" "No, father," said Pinocchio, and boing! His nose suddenly grew. That's what happens when you tell a lie, said Geppetto. Pinocchio, have you been picking your nose? Asked Geppetto again. Yes, father, said Pinocchio, and his nose shrank back to normal. One day, Pinocchio was playing under the kitchen table. Are you picking your nose, Pinocchio? Called Geppetto. No, father, called Pinocchio. Boing! Pinocchio still had his finger stuck up his nostril when his nose grew. It grew so quickly that his arm came off and flew across the room. Geppetto mended Pinocchio's arm, then he fetched a little box and opened it up. Pinocchio said, meet Mr. Cricket. He's going to stay with you and help you stop picking your nose. Pinocchio's nose started to tickle, but as he lifted up his finger, Mr. Cricket hopped onto it and shouted, don't pick your nose, Pinocchio. So he didn't. Then Mr. Cricket played games with Pinocchio to keep his fingers busy. But one day, Mr. Cricket jumped onto Pinocchio's finger too late and got shoved right up his nose. Get me out, he cried. How? Asked Pinocchio. Blow your nose into a tissue, said Mr. Cricket. So Pinocchio blew his nose and pop, pop, out came Mr. Cricket. I'm so sorry, Mr. Cricket. I promise I'll try not to pick my nose anymore. Blowing it is much more fun. The fairy had been watching and was so impressed by Pinocchio that, poof, she turned him into a real boy. And from that day on, Pinocchio never ever picked his nose again. The end. Our last book this morning is called Grumpy Jim Up All Night. We've read Grumpy Jim before, but this is a new Grumpy Jim book. It's called by Susan Lang and illustrated by Max Lang. Grumpy Monkey Up All Night. I'm sorry, I misread it. Thank you, kid. His name is Jim. That's why I got confused. Early in the evening, just about supper time, Norman heard a whole lot of whooping and hollering next door. What's the ruckus, Norman? Asked his neighbor, Jim Pansy. I'm so excited, Jim exclaimed. I'm going to sleep over at my parents' house. My whole family will be there. Mom, Dad, and my big sisters, Anne and Nan. Who's that? Asked Norman. Oh, yeah, my little brother, Tim, grumbled Jim. But never mind, it'll still be fun. Sleepovers are a good time, Norman agreed. Jim talked about all the great things he would do. First, we'll go termite fishing. Next, we'll tell scary stories. Then we'll have a midnight feast and wash it down with some jungle punch. I wouldn't drink punch too close to bedtime, Norman advised. Bedtime? Exclaimed Jim. Nobody sleeps at a sleepover. We're going to stay up all night. Sounds fun, said Norman. Mind if I tag along? A little later, they arrived at the tree where Jim's parents lived. It's my little grumpy monkey, Jim's mom cried as she gave him a hug. I'm so happy to see you. Mom, moaned Jim, I'm not little, and I'm not a monkey. I'm an ape. Jim's mom smiled and ruffled his fur. But you sure are grumpy, she said. No, I'm not, Jim scowled. I like your mom, said Norman. No fair. You didn't say we could bring a friend, said a voice coming down the path. Who's that? Asked Norman. Tim, exclaimed Jim's family. I thought he was your little brother, said Norman. I had a growth spurt, said Tim. What should we do first? Asked Jim's mom. Everyone answered at once. Termite fishing, pick fleas off each other, bud for mangoes. I know, said Tim. Measure each other to see who's the tallest. Maybe our guest should choose, suggested Jim's dad, turning to Norman. It's a tough decision, said Norman. It all sounds fun. Don't worry, said Anne. There'll be plenty of time to do everything because we're going to stay up all night, cheered Jim and his siblings. I don't know, said Jim's mom. Staying up all night could make for some very grumpy monkeys. And then the games began. Termite fishing, flea picking, bobbing for mangoes, scary stories. It was a dark and stormy night, said Jim. Tim trembled. Your brother's scared, said Jim's mom. Why not tell a happy story instead? Midnight feast. Hey, you have to share the jungle punch. But you didn't share the bananas. Stay up all night. It's really dark, said Tim, looking around. Because it's night, snapped Jim. Are you grumpy? Asked Tim. No, said Jim. Just then they heard a noise. Roar! Thunder! Shouted Tim, and his eyes went wide. Oh no, now it's dark and stormy. Shoo! Don't worry, said Jim. It's just Norman snoring. He does lots of funny snores. Sometimes it sounds like rah, 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 and sometimes it sounds like Tim laughed. Other times it's like hoo-wee, hoo-wee. Jim and Tim laughed and laughed all night long. As the sun came up, Tim fell asleep. Good idea, little brother, said Jim as he tucked him in and lay down. But just as he was about to close his eyes, "Good morning, my monkey," sang Jim's mom. "Mom," shouted Jim, "we're not monkeys, we're apes." "I prefer gorilla, but yeah, ape works," said Norman. "Oh, Jim, I told you staying up all night would make you grumpy," said Jim's mom, ruffling his fur. "I'm not." "You'll always be my grumpy monkey," whispered Jim's mom. So it was great seeing you all this morning. I'm so glad you were able to join Noah and Caden and me for Shabbat story time. We will be back next week at 9:15 for another set of stories. In the meantime, Sunday school starts again tomorrow for our pre-K through 5th graders and our 7th graders. You've got emails about what time to come, but we'll see you tomorrow morning to pick up all your materials for the spring semester at CDT. Our 7th, 8th, and 9th graders, we hope you have our 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th graders, we hope you have a great class tomorrow. Everyone else, we hope to see you really soon in person at our next Play Tamid or back here next Shabbat morning for story time. And in the meantime, let's sing one more song that says goodbye, my friends. We'll see you soon. Shalom, Chaverim, Shalom, Chaverim, Shalom, Shalom. Lehitraot, lehitraot, Shalom, Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.